The rain tapped insistently on the roof of the cabin, a steady rhythmic beat that filled the silence. Gareth sat alone in the dim glow of a single lamp, the amber light pooling around his cluttered desk. The smell of old paper and the faint acrid scent of the night storm lingered in the air. He flipped a page in his book, absently scratching his jaw where the first hints of a beard were making themselves known. It was peaceful here, deliberately so, a refuge from the noise of the world. He had carved out a quiet existence on the edge of nowhere, surrounded by trees and stars, and filled with the simple comforts of solitude. He hadn't expected anyone tonight. The first knock came so softly that he almost dismissed it as a trick of the storm. The second was firmer, just enough to tug his attention from the yellowed pages in his hands. He frowned, setting the book aside, and listened. The wind moaned through the eaves, but there was something else beneath it. A presence. Another knock, tentative, deliberate, human, or close enough. Gareth rose to his feet. He wasn't the kind of man who expected visitors, least of all on a night like this. His cabin was miles from the nearest town, a secluded sanctuary that only those with a very good reason would trouble themselves to find. He approached the door slowly, hand hovering near the old iron poker leaning by the fireplace. The door creaked as he pulled it open, the hinges protesting the sudden movement. And there she was. She stood just beyond the threshold, rainwater trickling from her hair and pooling at her feet. Her eyes, large, silver, and impossibly reflective, caught the dim light and seemed to drink it in. Her features were sharp and symmetrical, almost too perfect, as if crafted by some artisan who had never heard of human imperfections. She was draped in a cloak of some kind, shimmering faintly in a way that defied the ordinary. Beneath it, her slender frame seemed almost weightless. "Hello," she said softly. Her voice was melodic, as if each word was a note in a forgotten song. Gareth blinked. "Lost, are you?" A hint of something, perhaps confusion or amusement, touched her face. "Not precisely." He leaned against the doorframe, eyes narrowing. "You're standing in the middle of a storm, on my porch at night. What are you, a door-to-door poet?" Her head tilted slightly, considering him. "I am Lyra." "Good for you, Lyra." He gestured broadly to the rain-drenched world behind her. "And what exactly do you want?" There was a pause, long enough for the wind to push cold air between them. "Shelter." The simplicity of the request left him momentarily speechless. The rational part of his mind whispered all the reasons this was a bad idea. Strange woman, isolated cabin, unexplainable vibe. It was the stuff horror stories were made of. "Let me guess," he muttered, half to himself. "No wallet, no phone, no plausible explanation?" Her eyes, unsettling in their brilliance, never left his. "I have traveled a great distance. I am tired, and I do not wish to be alone tonight." Gareth felt a prickle along the back of his neck. His sarcasm curled instinctively around his unease. "You sure you're not selling vacuum cleaners, or maybe converting people to some obscure cosmic religion?" Lyra's lips twitched. "No vacuums, no conversions, just shelter." There was a long moment where her words hung between them like fog. Then, with a sigh that carried the weight of reluctant curiosity, he stepped aside. "Fine," he said, gesturing her in. "Just don't drip on my books." Inside, the warmth of the cabin swallowed them both. Gareth threw another log on the fire, sparks spiraling up into the chimney, while Lyra moved with careful, deliberate grace. She seemed to absorb her surroundings, eyes flicking from the rough-hewn beams overhead to the cluttered shelves lined with battered novels and ancient curiosities. "You live alone," she observed. "Brilliant deduction." He tossed a towel toward her. "Dry off before you short-circuit." She caught it easily, her movements fluid. "You joke a great deal." "Better than screaming into the void," he muttered, settling back into his chair. Lyra considered this. The void does not respond well to humor. Gareth raised an eyebrow. Speaking from experience? A flicker of something unreadable passed across her face. Yes. The fire crackled. The rain outside drummed its relentless rhythm. Silence stretched between them until Gareth, feeling the weight of her presence in a way he couldn't quite define, finally broke it. So, he said, you've got the look of someone who's either incredibly lost or running from something. Which is it? Her hands tightened on the towel, her knuckles pale. Both. The way she said it, the weight behind the word, made him sit up a little straighter. Care to elaborate? She hesitated. Watched. For a long time. I came here to escape. Watched by who? Her eyes darkened, as though shadows moved just beneath the surface. The Watchers. Catchy name. He rubbed his chin. And these Watchers, are they government types? Aliens? Creepy neighbors with binoculars? They are none of those things. Helpful? Her gaze did not waver. They do not sleep. They do not blink. They find cracks in the mind, the spaces where fear hides, and they feed. Gareth stared at her. The fire popped loudly, making him jump. Well, he said, forcing a chuckle, you've got quite the imagination. She said nothing. The wind howled against the windows, and in that moment, he couldn't quite shake the feeling that there were cracks in the world, tiny, invisible cracks, and something dark might be peering through. The night deepened as the storm persisted, the rain a constant patter against the windows. Inside the small cabin, the fire burned low, casting shadows that danced lazily on the walls. Gareth was halfway through convincing himself that he hadn't let a complete lunatic into his home when the knock came again. This time from his bedroom door. He groaned, already feeling a headache blossom between his temples. He hadn't even made it under the covers yet. The knock, soft but insistent, repeated. Are you kidding me? He muttered, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. He trudged to the door, rubbing his face in frustration. Is this going to be a regular thing with you? Midnight conferences? When he opened the door, Lyra stood there, framed by the flickering light from the hall. She looked smaller than before, her silver eyes wide and filled with something he had trouble naming. Vulnerability, perhaps. Or was it fear? I need to ask something of you, she said quietly. Gareth crossed his arms. Let me guess. You need a map to Mars? Or maybe my toaster doubles as a galactic beacon. Her expression didn't change. If anything, she looked more solemn. I would like to sleep next to you tonight. His brain screeched to a halt. What? Sleep. Next to you, she repeated with slow, careful enunciation. In this room. On this bed. For a moment, Gareth could do nothing but blink. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, trying to process her words. Humor bubbled up as a defense mechanism. Wow, I know my charm is legendary, but this is a record. Lyra tilted her head. Charm? Never mind, he said, running a hand through his hair. Look, this isn't exactly normal behavior. Humans have rules about this kind of thing. Boundaries. I am aware, she replied, her tone serious. But I am not human, and I do not wish to be alone. Gareth sighed. His sarcasm fizzled, replaced by the tiniest flicker of concern. Why? What are you afraid of? Her gaze remained steady. The dark. The dark? He snorted. You've traveled across the universe, survived who knows what, and you're afraid of the dark? Lyra didn't smile. It is not the darkness itself. It is what hides within it. The Watchers. There it was again. That name, whispered with the weight of galaxies behind it. Gareth felt a shiver crawl up his spine, but he shook it off. Look, I'm not saying I believe in your shadowy stalkers, but there's no Watchers here. Just bad weather, creaky wood, and my questionable life choices. You'll be fine. She stepped closer, her presence both delicate and unsettling. They do not need to be here to find you. They exist in the spaces between silence and sleep. Well, that's comforting, he muttered. They cannot reach me if I am not alone, she added simply. When another mind is near, they cannot seep into the cracks. Fear weakens when shared. Gareth opened his mouth for another smart remark, but something about her voice stopped him. There was a rawness to it, a quiet plea that pulled at him in a way he couldn't explain. He sighed deeply, the weight of her fear settling on his shoulders. Fine, he grumbled, stepping aside. You win. Come in before I change my mind. The bed was small. That became immediately clear as they settled in. Gareth lay stiff as a board on one side, his pillow piled high beneath his head. Lyra lay on her back beside him, her arms crossed neatly over her chest, as if she were preparing for a meditation ritual rather than sleep. This is not weird at all, he muttered to the ceiling. I appreciate your kindness, she said softly. Yeah, well, I'm a sucker for sob stories. Silence stretched between them for several long moments. Outside, the wind pressed against the cabin, making the wooden beams groan in protest. Lyra's breathing was steady, calm, almost mechanical. Gareth, on the other hand, felt hyper-aware of everything. The weight of the blankets, the faint scent of rain in her hair, the electric hum that seemed to linger in the air when she was near. So this is how you do it? He asked suddenly. Do what? Sleep? You just lie there like a statue? She turned her head slightly, her silver eyes catching the faint glow of the fire's embers. I have not truly slept in many rotations. Rotations? He frowned. You mean years? Your measure of time is imprecise, but yes. That's unhealthy. Necessary, she corrected. The watchers hunt in the quiet. When the mind surrenders to dreams, they slip between the folds of thought. Sleep is an invitation. Gareth swallowed. You're really committed to this whole watchers thing, huh? It is not a matter of belief. Right, because belief implies doubt, and you're pretty sure they're real. They are real, she said firmly. He sighed, rubbing his temples. You're making it awfully hard to enjoy a good night's rest. Lyra's lips curved slightly, a ghost of a smile. Humor is your defense. One of many, he muttered. Another silence settled in, deeper this time. The fire hissed softly as a log split, sparks dancing upward. Gareth closed his eyes, trying to ignore the strange warmth radiating from Lyra's side of the bed. Thank you, she whispered. He cracked one eye open. For what? For sharing the quiet. It makes the dark smaller. Her words, simple and sincere, tugged at something in him he hadn't felt in a long time. He didn't answer, but a faint, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Maybe, just maybe, he thought, as sleep finally began to claim him. Sharing the quiet wasn't so bad after all. The morning arrived reluctantly, with the sun a pale and sluggish disk peeking through heavy clouds. Rain still clung to the earth like a stubborn memory, but the worst of the storm had passed. The cabin, small and sturdy, seemed to exhale a sigh of relief, as the wind no longer battered its wooden frame. Gareth woke slowly, his mind swimming up from the depths of a sleep far deeper than any he'd had in recent memory. He stretched, feeling a surprising sense of ease in his muscles, until his hand brushed something cool and smooth beside him. Memory came rushing back, and he opened his eyes to find Lyra lying perfectly still, her silver eyes already open and staring at the ceiling. She hadn't moved an inch from where she had lain the night before, her hands folded neatly over her chest like a figure carved from marble. Good morning, she said without turning her head. Gareth blinked, his voice rough with sleep. I feel like I just woke up next to a statue. Lyra's head tilted slightly toward him. I do not require much movement during rest. Yeah, no kidding. I think even my furniture shifted more than you did. He rubbed his eyes, suppressing a yawn. Do you ever blink? I can, she replied, demonstrating with a slow, deliberate closing of her eyes. "Okay, now you're just showing off." Her lips twitched in what might have been a smile, an expression so subtle it was more suggestion than certainty. Gareth sat up, stretching again as his joints cracked in protest. He glanced at the faint glow of the fire's dying embers. "So, I'm alive. No shadowy monsters swallowed me in my sleep. That's a win." Lyra sat up as well, her movements fluid and unnervingly graceful. "They could not reach us. Fear has less power when shared." He scratched his head, still groggy. "Fear's got plenty of power, trust me. I've been terrified of my bank account for years, and sharing that hasn't helped one bit." Her silver eyes regarded him curiously. "Your humor is a curious defense mechanism. You wield it like a shield." "Yeah, well, it beats curling up into a ball and crying." He stood, padding toward the small kitchen corner. "Coffee?" Lyra's gaze followed him. "I do not require sustenance in the way you do, but I am interested in your ritual." Gareth snorted as he filled the kettle. "Calling it a ritual makes it sound a lot more spiritual than it really is. It's just caffeine and survival." A few minutes later, with the rich aroma of coffee filling the air, he handed her a mug. She held it delicately, inspecting it as if it were a specimen from another world. "You drink this often?" "Like it's the only thing keeping me tethered to sanity." He took a long sip and sighed contentedly. Liquid hope." Lyra brought the mug to her lips, inhaling the steam before taking a cautious sip. Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of something like surprise crossing her face. "It is bitter." "Yeah, that's part of its charm. I detect complex layers of flavor, earth, heat, and a sharpness that lingers." Gareth raised an eyebrow. "Wow, you make it sound like an ancient elixir of cosmic power. It's just coffee, Lyra." She sipped again, slower this time, as though deciphering a puzzle hidden within the taste. "It is intriguing. Glad you like it." He leaned back in his chair, watching her. "You're a strange one, you know that?" "I am aware." There was no shame in her admission, only a simple, quiet truth. The day stretched ahead of them, the rain tapering off into a light drizzle. Gareth tried to go about his usual routine, fixing the loose boards on the porch, stacking firewood and checking the generator. But Lyra's presence was a constant, quiet intrigue. She moved through the cabin as if every corner held a secret waiting to be discovered. When she found his bookshelf, her eyes lit with a kind of reverence. She ran her fingers lightly over the spines, pausing now and then to tilt her head at the titles. "You enjoy stories," she observed. "Yeah, they're cheaper than therapy." She pulled out a thick, weathered volume and opened it carefully. "These words, they create worlds in your mind." That's the idea. Her gaze remained on the pages, her expression one of deep concentration. "Your species creates fictions to explore truths." Gareth paused in his work, the depth of her observation catching him off guard. "That's surprisingly accurate." She closed the book gently and looked at him. "It is an admirable trait. To imagine beyond the constraints of what is real, there is power in that." He chuckled. "We also imagine plenty of nonsense. Aliens invading Earth, flying saucers, tentacled space monsters." He trailed off, realizing too late the irony of his words. Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly. "We are not all tentacled." Gareth laughed, the sound breaking the tension. "Touché." As the afternoon waned, a strange hum filled the air. It was subtle at first, barely more than a vibration beneath the floorboards. Gareth frowned, setting down his tools. "You hear that?" Lyra's posture stiffened, her eyes flicking toward the ceiling. "Yes." The hum grew louder, a low, resonant thrum that seemed to pulse in time with an unseen heartbeat. The walls shivered, and the light bulb above them flickered wildly. Gareth felt his pulse quicken. What is that? Lyra's voice was a whisper. A signal. A signal? From who? She rose slowly, her gaze far away, as though seeing something just beyond the visible world. They are near. Gareth's stomach tightened. The Watchers? She nodded, her expression grim. They do not knock, they do not announce themselves. They slip through cracks unnoticed until they are already inside. The air grew heavy, oppressive. Gareth swallowed hard, his mind racing. Okay, so what do we do? How do we keep them out? Lyra turned to him, her eyes bright with an inner light that seemed almost tangible. We fill the silence. We make noise, laughter, words, music. These are shields against the dark. He stared at her, his mind spinning. You want me to fight cosmic nightmares with a comedy routine? It is a start. Gareth exhaled sharply, a nervous grin tugging at his lips. Well, I've always been good at making a fool of myself. Might as well put it to use. As the hum deepened, Gareth grabbed a spoon and began banging it rhythmically against a pot. How's this for music? Think they like percussion? Lyra's lips twitched into a fleeting smile. It will do. And so side by side they faced the unseen, filling the small cabin with sound, laughter, and the absurdity of human defiance, until the shadows, for a moment, seemed to retreat. The rain had finally stopped by evening, leaving the cabin wrapped in a damp, earthy quiet. The wind sighed through the trees, the last remnants of the storm retreating like a tale told in whispers. Gareth stood on the porch, mug in hand, watching the mist curl through the pines. He liked this kind of silence, comfortable, familiar. Unlike them. He took a long sip of coffee, letting the warmth settle into his chest. Inside, Lyra moved like a shadow, her steps so quiet he half expected her to simply dissolve into the air. But she was there, real and sharp-edged, inspecting his collection of tools with that same curious tilt of her head. You know, Gareth called over his shoulder, if you're planning to disassemble my toaster to build a hyperdrive, at least leave me the bread slots. She looked up, her silver eyes flashing in amusement. A toaster would make a poor hyperdrive, he grinned. Well, it barely makes toast, so I'm not surprised. The floor creaked as Lyra crossed the room, her movements fluid as water. She stopped just beside him, close enough that he could feel the faint hum of her presence, something more than body heat, as though she carried static electricity in her veins. Do you always rely on humor? She asked, studying him with unsettling intensity. Only when I'm awake, he replied, smirking. Why? Thinking of writing a thesis on me? Her expression remained serious. It is fascinating how humans weave lightness into dark moments, a mechanism of survival. Your species wields words like a blade against fear. Gareth blinked, caught off guard by her insight. I guess it's easier than staring straight into the abyss. Jokes give it less power. The abyss does not laugh back. He raised an eyebrow. Is that a proverb where you're from? It is truth, she said simply. He chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. You've got a way with ominous statements, you know that? She offered a small, enigmatic smile. It is my nature. The night deepened as they shared a quiet dinner, leftover soup and stale crackers on mismatched plates. Gareth noted that Lyra didn't eat much, instead stirring her spoon in slow circles, as though tasting was an act of contemplation rather than nourishment. Not exactly a 5-star meal, he said, crunching a cracker loudly. But hey, I'm a man of simple tastes. She tilted her head. Simple? Tastes? Yeah, you know. Bread, cheese, mystery meats that may or may not be from this planet. The basics. Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly in mock suspicion. Mystery meats? He grinned, leaning forward conspiratorially. Processed stuff. Highly questionable origins. Probably made in a lab. Your species consumes synthetic proteins willingly? Willingly might be a stretch. More like out of necessity and bad decisions. Her lips curved faintly. That explains much. He chuckled, leaning back in his chair, Yeah, we're a mess, but we're a lovable mess. She didn't argue, but her gaze lingered on him longer than was comfortable, as if she could peel back the layers of his humanity and see the raw, unguarded parts beneath. Later, they sat by the fire, the flames casting long shadows that flickered like memories against the walls. Gareth poked at the embers with a stick, watching sparks swirl upward like tiny constellations. Lyra sat cross-legged beside him, her hands resting on her knees in perfect stillness. She stared into the flames, her eyes reflecting the light in a way that made them seem almost alive, like liquid metal in motion. "You ever tell stories where you're from?" he asked, breaking the silence. She tilted her head. "Stories?" "Yeah. Tall tales, legends, bedtime yarns, that kind of thing." "We share knowledge," she said slowly, "but not as you do. Stories are not woven from fiction. They are threads of history, passed through minds like currents." He frowned. "No fiction? No myths or make-believe? Truth is enough." He shook his head, smiling. "That's where you're missing out. Fiction's what makes us human. We dream bigger than reality. It's how we explore what could be." Lyra considered his words, her expression thoughtful. "And yet, even your fictions are built on truth." Gareth leaned back, folding his arms behind his head. "Touché." The fire crackled between them, the sound a soothing rhythm. Outside, the night pressed close, a velvet curtain embroidered with distant stars. "You still afraid of the dark?" he asked after a moment. "I do not fear darkness itself," she murmured. "I fear what follows in its wake, the things that hunger in the spaces between." "The Watchers," he said quietly. "Yes." He chewed his lip, weighing his next words carefully. "You keep talking about them like they're more than just bad dreams. Are they real, or just in your head?" She met his gaze, her eyes steady. "They are real. They are shadows made sentient, echoes of thought that feed on fear. Where silence dwells, they thrive." Gareth swallowed, feeling the room grow colder. "You're not exactly filling me with warm fuzzies, Lyra." "It is better to know," she said, her voice like the edge of a blade. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Knowledge doesn't always make things easier." "No," she agreed, "but it makes them survivable." The fire burned low, its light dimming. Gareth felt the weight of sleep pulling at him, but his mind remained restless, tangled in thoughts of shadows and unseen watchers. "You need rest," Lyra said softly. "I'll sleep when I stop imagining tentacles under my bed," he muttered, her brow furrowed. "Tentacles? Never mind." She rose gracefully, extending a hand. "Come, I will guard the silence." He took her hand, her touch cool and grounding. As they settled into their uneasy truce with the dark, Gareth couldn't help but wonder what lay between the spaces of her silence, and whether, by morning, the dark would dare cross that line. The storm had returned, but this time with a steady, determined rain, rather than the chaotic tempest of before. It drummed against the windows like a familiar, if insistent, companion. Gareth stood in the middle of his small living room, arms crossed, watching Lyra move with careful deliberation as she examined the device she had pulled from within the folds of her jacket. It looked like a polished stone at first glance, dark and smooth, but as she held it, faint blue lines of energy pulsed across its surface, in patterns that shifted like a living circuit. "Okay," Gareth said, breaking the heavy silence. "I've been patient. I really have. But it's time for some answers. What is that thing?" Lyra's fingers traced the lines with a kind of reverence. "A harmonic core." He blinked. "A harmonic. What now?" "It tunes to frequencies beyond your perception. A resonance beacon, both a guide and a shield." Gareth raised an eyebrow. "Sounds impressive. Does it also brew coffee or wash dishes?" Lyra glanced up, her expression somewhere between bemusement and exasperation. "Its functions are not domestic." "Shocking." He gestured vaguely toward it. So this thing, what's it resonating with? Should I be worried about it exploding? She tilted her head, the corners of her lips twitching. Not unless you fear the vibrations of the cosmos collapsing your molecular structure. Right, he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. I'll just add that to my ever-growing list of concerns. As the rain softened outside, a low hum filled the room. Faint at first, like the whisper of a tuning fork struck just out of earshot. Lyra's posture stiffened as her eyes locked onto the harmonic core. Is that supposed to happen? Gareth asked, feeling the hairs on his arms stand on end. Lyra remained motionless for a beat too long. They are searching. They? She lifted her gaze, and something in her expression made his stomach twist. The Watchers. They move between frequencies. They listen for stillness. Fantastic. He threw his hands up. I knew I shouldn't have let you talk me into this whole sound as a weapon strategy. I should have gone with my first instinct, building a giant industrial-grade bug zapper. Her gaze softened, a hint of amusement breaking through her serious demeanor. Sound is not merely a weapon, it is a barrier, a wave to disrupt their form. Right. So, he clapped his hands together, a little too loudly. Should I start singing? Maybe crank up some death metal? What's the most disruptive frequency we're talking about here? Your human music contains a chaotic energy, she acknowledged. It could prove useful. Gareth grinned, heading for his old stereo. Now we're talking. A few moments later, the cabin filled with the blaring, unmistakable riffs of 1980s rock, power chords and wailing vocals that seemed to shake the very air. Gareth banged his head in time with the music, air guitaring with wild abandon. Take that, cosmic horrors, he shouted, strumming an imaginary solo. I hope you like power ballads. Lyra watched him, her eyes wide, her expression hovering between bewilderment and a strange sort of admiration. This is effective? Absolutely, he yelled over the music. No shadow creature can stand up to the raw might of an electric guitar. She raised an eyebrow. Your confidence is formidable. Thank you, I practice. He spun dramatically, striking a final pose as the song ended with a triumphant clash of cymbals. The hum that had filled the room faded slightly, the tension lifting just enough for Gareth to breathe easier. He wiped a mock bead of sweat from his brow. Mission accomplished. Lyra's lips twitched again, that almost smile returning. Your methods are unique. I like to think so. He collapsed onto the couch, his grin fading as he looked at her more seriously. But it won't work forever, will it? She sat beside him, the harmonic core resting in her lap, its blue lines dimming to a softer glow. Number. Their hunger is patient. Noise confuses, but it does not destroy. Gareth sighed, running a hand through his hair. Then what does? How do you get rid of them for good? Lyra's gaze grew distant. Light. Pure, undiluted resonance. A burst that severs their connection to this plane. Okay, he said slowly. And where do we find one of those? Her fingers tightened around the core. We make it. The rain continued its rhythmic patter as they worked together in the cramped space of the cabin. Lyra explained the concept with the calm certainty of someone describing a long-forgotten truth. Gareth, for his part, tried not to let his skepticism show too much as he gathered wires, batteries, and every odd electronic component he had lying around. Let me get this straight, he said, holding up a pair of rusty clamps. We're basically building a cosmic flashbang out of junkyard parts. Lyra nodded. A rudimentary construct, but it will suffice if we calibrate the frequencies correctly. He squinted at the mess of wires. Define correctly. She didn't answer directly, instead adjusting the harmonic core with deft, precise movements. Energy seeks form. We will shape it. Gareth sighed. You're really good at making things sound both poetic and terrifying. It is my nature, she said again, her voice soft. He chuckled despite himself. Well, let's hope my nature as an amateur electrician doesn't blow us up. As the makeshift device began to hum with latent power, a strange vibration filled the air once more. This time, it wasn't just a whisper. It was a presence, a gathering of unseen eyes pressing in from every corner. Gareth felt his chest tighten, cold dread pooling in his stomach. They're here, aren't they? Yes. He swallowed hard, forcing a grin. Good. I've been meaning to give them a proper welcome. Lyra met his gaze, her expression fierce. Together we resonate. Together. He gripped the device, his knuckles white, and as the light began to build, bright and unrelenting, the shadows quivered, and the abyss, for the first time, blinked. The light from the makeshift resonance device had burned so brightly that Gareth saw it even with his eyes squeezed shut. The intense glow seared through the cabin like a supernova contained in a bottle, throwing shadows into retreat as though reality itself had been sliced open by the edge of a blade. Then, with a jarring snap that left the air trembling, it all collapsed into silence. Gareth blinked hard, his vision swimming with ghostly afterimages of brilliant white against the dim confines of the cabin. A ringing buzzed in his ears, a sharp reminder that whatever they had done, it hadn't exactly been gentle on human senses. Did it work? He croaked, the words scratchy in his throat. Beside him, Lyra remained still, her fingers resting lightly on the harmonic core, now dim and inert. Her silver eyes gleamed faintly in the low light as she slowly scanned the room, as if listening to something far beyond the human range of hearing. Their presence has diminished, she murmured. The connection is severed. For now. For now? Gareth repeated, groaning as he rubbed his temples. You mean we just hit pause on this nightmare? Great. I was hoping for a full-on game-over-you-win scenario. Lyra tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. Victory is rarely permanent in the realms between. He let out a hollow laugh, the kind that comes when there's nothing left to say but sarcasm. You should put that on a motivational poster. Hang in there. Victory's just an illusion. She gave him a look of mild reproach, though a flicker of amusement tugged at the corners of her mouth. Sarcasm will not alter reality. No, he agreed, but it makes it a lot more bearable. They sat in the calm aftermath, the rain outside now a soft patter that seemed almost soothing compared to the chaos that had filled the cabin moments earlier. Gareth stared at the harmonic core, its once vibrant lines now nothing more than faint, dead tracings across its surface. Is this thing fried? He asked, poking at it cautiously. Lyra shook her head. It has merely expended its stored energy. It can be recharged. Ah, rechargeable cosmic tech. I should have guessed. Do I need to plug it into a wall socket or leave it under a full moon? She arched an eyebrow. Neither. It requires vibrational alignment within a field of... Yeah, he interrupted with a grin. You had me at vibrational. You keep the sciencey stuff. I'll stick to being the guy who pushes buttons and hopes for the best. Lyra allowed a faint smile. A curious partnership. Hey, he said, spreading his arms. Name one other human who'd open his home to an alien, battle shadowy interdimensional creeps, and survive to tell the tale. Her gaze softened. You are unique. I'll take that as a compliment. He sighed, leaning back against the wall. So, what's next? We can't just keep blasting them every time they show up. Eventually something's gonna give, and I'd prefer it wasn't the fabric of reality or my sanity. Lyra was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing slow circles over her knees. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. There is another way. Gareth sat up straighter. I'm listening. She hesitated. It is dangerous. More dangerous than what we just did? Yes. He frowned. Well, that's comforting. Her eyes met his, steady and calm, as if bracing him for a truth he wouldn't like. The watchers are drawn to silence because silence is void, absence. But in certain frequencies, there exists a resonance that disrupts not only their form, but their very connection to this plane. It is a binding force, a cage of sound that cannot be breached. A sound cage, he echoed, trying to wrap his mind around the idea. Okay, that sounds doable. Loud music, right? We've got that covered. It is not simply loudness, she corrected gently. It is harmony, precise, unbroken alignment, a frequency that resonates in perfect balance with the void itself. He squinted. You lost me again. Can we use, like, a synthesizer? Maybe a custom playlist? Her lips twitched into a brief smile. Not quite. Gareth rubbed his temples again, feeling a familiar sense of impending doom. And I'm guessing this perfect frequency isn't something I can just download from the internet. No. Figures. The storm outside began to pick up again, thunder rumbling like a distant, restless beast. Gareth felt it in his chest, a reminder that nature too carried forces beyond control. So, he ventured, this whole harmony cage thing, how do we make it? What do we need? Lyra's eyes glimmered with something that might have been hope, or perhaps determination. We need a conduit, a source of pure, untethered resonance, something that vibrates between worlds without collapsing into one. He nodded slowly. And where do we find one of those? Her silence stretched long enough that he began to suspect the answer wouldn't be pleasant. Lyra. Her gaze didn't waver. You. He blinked. Me? You, she repeated softly. Your existence hums with imperfection and possibility. Human consciousness is a spectrum, an orchestra of thoughts that collide, diverge, and unify. Your mind itself is a resonance field. Gareth stared at her, feeling the weight of her words settle heavily on his chest. You're saying, I'm a walking, talking frequency generator? In essence. He exhaled sharply. I feel like I should have gotten a heads up on this sooner. You would not have believed it. Fair point. He rubbed his face, suddenly feeling very tired. So what happens if we try this? What's the worst-case scenario? The resonance could collapse, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You might be consumed. Of course. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the absurdity of it all wash over him. Risk of total annihilation. Perfect. Lyra reached out, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Her touch was cool, steadying. You are not alone. He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. I know. And for the first time, the storm outside seemed just a little quieter. The cabin was impossibly quiet. Not the comforting kind of silence where the world breathes softly, but a hollow, unnatural void that seemed to swallow sound itself. Gareth stood at the center of it, every nerve on edge, his heart thudding like a wayward drum as Lyra adjusted the harmonic core in his hands. It pulsed faintly now, a blue glow that beat in rhythm with his quickening pulse. You're certain this won't kill me? He asked, his voice dry with forced humor. Lyra, her silver eyes calm and unwavering, tilted her head. No. Ah, he swallowed. Well, at least you're honest. She offered the slightest quirk of her lips. Truth is preferable to false hope. Gareth exhaled a shaky breath. You know, most pep talks end with something about believing in yourself. You are human, she said gently. You are belief in motion. He blinked, caught off guard. That's kind of beautiful. She placed her hands over his, steadying them against the harmonic core. Resonance is beauty. It is also power. The plan, as plans go, was perilously thin. The Watchers, formless, relentless entities that hunted through silence, had been momentarily repelled by their previous burst of resonance, but the temporary reprieve would not last. The only way to sever their connection fully was to flood the space between dimensions with a pure harmonic frequency. And the only conduit capable of generating that resonance? Gareth's chaotic, overthinking, entirely too human mind. "I still think there should have been a training montage," he muttered, as he focused on the swirling glow of the core. "Your time is limited," Lyra reminded him. "Story of my life." He took a deep breath. "Okay, let's do this." The air around him shimmered as the harmonic core thrummed to life. His senses stretched in ways he didn't know were possible, colors bending, sounds twisting, the very fabric of reality vibrating as though plucked by an unseen hand. Gareth felt his mind slipping, the edges fraying as he hovered between understanding and madness. "This feels weird." "You are aligning with the void," Lyra said calmly, her voice the only constant anchor in the storm of sensations. "Is that what we're calling it?" He winced. "Feels more like I'm turning into cosmic spaghetti." She didn't laugh, but there was warmth in her tone. "Hold the frequency. Stay with me." "I'm trying," he gritted out, the pressure building inside his skull. "How do I keep from exploding?" "Focus on something real," she whispered. "A thought, a feeling, a memory that grounds you." His mind raced, slipping through fragments of his life, late nights with books, endless cups of coffee, starlit skies, and the quiet peace of being alone in a world too noisy to understand. But none of it held, not until he remembered. "Lyra," he murmured, the name slipping from his lips like a thread of light in the dark. She squeezed his hands. "I am here." He clung to that. Her voice, her presence, the way her alien grace had felt strangely human when she laughed at his terrible jokes, the quiet strength behind her serene demeanor, the mystery of a being who had crossed galaxies and still marveled at the ordinary kindness of offering someone a place to rest. The resonance steadied, a perfect note of harmony that vibrated through his very being. The watchers stirred, black tendrils of shadow rippling along the edges of the room, drawn by the pull of his mind. But this time, he didn't recoil. Gareth grinned, wild and fierce. "You want to dance, you creepy void things? Let's dance." The watchers surged, a tide of silence bending toward him, their hunger palpable. But the resonance grew brighter, stronger, a light that cracked the dark like a sunrise clawing through the night. Lyra's energy joined his, a symphony of sound that shattered the stillness. Together, they resonated. Together, they broke the silence. When the storm passed, there was only light, software warm, inviting. Gareth collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. Did we win?" Lyra knelt beside him, her expression serene. "Yes." He let out a relieved, incredulous laugh. "We actually did it. I didn't explode." "No," she agreed with a small smile. "You did not." "Best news I've had all day." He rubbed his eyes, exhaustion pulling at him. "So what happens now? Do we, I don't know, ride off into the sunset? Build a soundproof bunker? Order pizza?" Lyra regarded him with a curious tilt of her head. "Pizza? It's a human thing," he said, waving a hand. "Comfort food." "Ah," she seemed to consider this. "Perhaps." He chuckled, feeling lighter than he had in days. "I'm serious, though. What's next for you?" Her gaze drifted toward the window, where the rain had finally ceased. The world outside was fresh and new, the storm having washed it clean. "I remain." He frowned. "Here?" She nodded slowly. "If you will have me." Gareth blinked, a warmth spreading in his chest that had nothing to do with resonance fields. "You mean that?" "I do?" He grinned. "Then yeah, you can stay." A beat of silence passed between them, this time the good kind, filled with possibility rather than dread. Later, as they sat together watching the sky clear, Gareth leaned back with a sigh. "So, about that harmonic core, can it play music?" Lyra arched a brow. It is not a toy. Sure, he said with a wink. But think of the possibilities. Cosmic karaoke. Her laughter was soft but real. You are incorrigible. And you love it, he shot back. I am learning. They sat there side by side, an ordinary man and an extraordinary being, wrapped in the quiet hum of a universe that, for once, had decided to leave them in peace, and somewhere beyond the stars the silence finally gave way to song.